The widow's heart, the golden light of evening stretched across the Montana plains, painting the wooden cabin in warm amber hues. Sarah Mitchell stood on the front porch, her calloused hands gripping the weathered railing as she watched the sun sink toward the distant mountains. The silence was complete, broken only by the gentle lowing of cattle in the far pasture and the whisper of wind through the tall grass that she had grown accustomed to the quiet. 3 years had passed since cholera took her husband Thomas, leaving her alone on their homestead with nothing but memories and the endless work of keeping the ranch alive. At 28, Sarah felt decades older. Her auburn hair, once carefully pinned and styled, now hung in a simple braid down her back. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now strong and sun-weathered from years of mending fences, milking cows, and chopping wood. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles away, and the small town of Cedar Falls was a full day's ride. Sarah had learned to find companionship in the rhythm of daily tasks, the changing seasons, and the vast sky that stretched endlessly above her small corner of the world. She told herself she was content with solitude. She told herself she didn't miss the sound of another voice at the dinner table, or the warmth of another person beside her in the cold winter nights. But sometimes, in moments like this, when the dying light painted everything in shades of gold and rose, loneliness settled over her like a heavy blanket. Sarah drew her woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned to go inside. The cabin was small but well-built, with thick log walls that Thomas had chinked himself during their first autumn together. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and Sarah had lit a small fire to chase away the evening chill. The flames danced cheerfully, casting dancing shadows across the simple furniture Thomas had made by hand. She ladled stew from the pot hanging over the fire and sat at the small wooden table, eating in the familiar silence. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the shutters slightly. Sarah paused, spoon halfway to her mouth, listening. Something felt different tonight. The cattle sounded restless, their calls more frequent and agitated than usual. Setting down her bowl, Sarah moved to the window and peered out into the gathering dusk. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then a movement caught her eye near the tree line at the edge of her property. A figure emerged from the shadows between the pines, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely at home in the wilderness. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Even in the dim light, she could see the distinctive silhouette clearly. The man wore traditional Apache clothing, his long black hair adorned with feathers that caught what remained of the daylight. He moved steadily toward her cabin, and despite every instinct telling her to bar the door and reach for Thomas's rifle, something about his unhurried, purposeful approach kept her rooted at the window. As he drew closer, Sarah could make out more details. He was a giant of a man, easily 6.5 feet tall, with broad shoulders and powerful arms. Intricate beadwork decorated his buckskin shirt, and she could see the glint of a knife at his belt. But what struck her most were his eyes. Even from this distance, she could see their intensity, dark and intelligent, fixed directly on her cabin. Sarah stepped back from the window, her heart racing. She had heard stories, of course, about the Apache bands that still moved through this territory. Most were peaceful now, but tensions remained high between the settlers and the native tribes. Thomas had always treated any Apache he encountered with respect, trading fairly when they came through, and Sarah had continued that practice in the few instances she had dealt with traveling bands. But this was different. This man was alone, and he was coming directly to her door. Sarah moved to the fireplace and took down Thomas's rifle from its place above the mantel. She checked the load with trembling fingers, then moved back to the window. The man was closer, now, perhaps 50 yards away. In the dying light, she could see his face more clearly. Strong features, high cheekbones, and those penetrating dark eyes. He showed no signs of hostility, no weapon drawn. But Sarah's pulse hammered in her throat nonetheless. A gentle knock came at the door. 3 measured raps, neither demanding nor tentative. Sarah stared at the heavy wooden door, the rifle heavy in her hands. For a long moment, silence stretched between the cabin and the man outside. "I mean you no harm," came a deep voice, speaking English with only a slight accent. "I wish only to speak." Sarah found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "What do you want?" "My name is Kaya. I have watched your land for many moons. You work alone. You are strong." The words sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but not entirely from fear. There was something in his tone, a respectful quality that surprised her. She moved closer to the door but kept the rifle ready. "I don't understand," she called through the thick wood. "Winter comes soon. Hard winter. You cannot survive it alone. Sarah bristled at this, her fear mixing with indignation. I've survived 3 winters already. I can manage. A pause, then. This winter will be different. The signs are clear. Much snow, cold that bites deep. Even the animals know. They gather more food, grow thicker coats. Despite herself, Sarah found truth in his words. She had noticed the same signs. The squirrels had been unusually busy. Their cattle had grown their winter coats earlier than usual, and the geese had been flying south in larger numbers than she'd ever seen. Why does this concern you? She asked. Another pause, longer this time. When Kaya spoke again, his voice was quieter, more personal. I have watched you work your land. You tend your animals with kindness. You do not waste. You understand the balance. This is rare among your people. Sarah pressed her palm against the rough wood of the door. Something in his tone made her chest tight with emotion she couldn't name. 3 seasons I have watched, he continued. In spring, you planted with wisdom, not greed. In summer, you shared water with the deer when the creek ran low. In autumn, you left grain for the birds. You live in harmony with the land. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes unexpectedly. She had done those things, small acts that seemed natural and right, never thinking anyone noticed or cared. I still don't understand what you want from me, she whispered. I want to help you survive the winter, and I want ... His voice grew, even quieter. I want to know you. The simple honesty in those words hit Sarah like a physical blow. When had anyone last wanted to know her? Since Thomas's death, she had become almost invisible, a widow who bought supplies in town with few words and fewer smiles. People were kind enough, but distant, as if widowhood were a disease they might catch. I don't even know you, Sarah said, but her grip on the rifle had loosened. Then let me remedy that. Sarah closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the door. Every practical thought in her head screamed that this was dangerous, foolish. But beneath the fear was something else, something she hadn't felt in 3 long years. Curiosity, hope, the possibility that she might not have to face another winter, another year, another decade alone. Slowly, Sarah set the rifle aside and lifted the heavy wooden bar that secured the door. Her hand shook as she turned the handle and pulled the door open. Kaya stood on her porch, even more imposing up close. He was indeed a giant, towering over her 5'4" frame. But his hands were empty, held slightly away from his sides in a gesture of peace. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked with lines that spoke of both hardship and laughter. Those dark eyes held hers steadily, patient and kind. Thank you, he said simply. Sarah stepped back, wordlessly inviting him inside. Kaya had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. Once inside, he looked around the small cabin with interest, his gaze taking in the homemade furniture, the carefully tended fire, the simple but clean living space. You have made a good home, he said. My husband built most of it, Sarah replied, then wondered why she had mentioned Thomas so quickly. He was wise in his building. The walls will hold against the strongest winds. Sarah gestured toward the table. Would you like some stew? I have plenty. Kaya nodded gravely. I would be honored. As Sarah ladled stew into a second bowl, she snuck glances at her unexpected guest. He sat easily in Thomas's chair, his large frame somehow not overwhelming the small space. There was a stillness about him, a quality of being completely present in the moment that Sarah found both calming and intriguing. You said you've been watching, Sarah said as she set the bowl before him. For how long? Since the second spring after your husband's death. I was hunting in the high country and saw smoke from your chimney. I thought the cabin was abandoned, but then I saw you working in the garden. He paused, tasting the stew. This is very good. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment. You've been watching for over a year. Yes, I needed to understand who you were, whether you could be trusted with what. Kaya set down his spoon and looked at her directly. My heart. The simple statement hung in the air between them. Sarah felt her breath catch, her pulse quickening for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. I don't understand, she whispered. Kaya leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. My wife died 6 winters ago, in the sickness that took many of our people. Since then I have lived alone, moving with the seasons, hunting, trading, living day to day, but watching you these many months, seeing your strength, your kindness, your respect for the land. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I began to hope again. Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling. Hope for what? For a companion, a partner, someone to share the burdens and joys of life. His voice grew softer. For love, if such a thing is possible between us. Sarah's chest felt tight, emotions she had buried for 3 years threatening to overwhelm her. You don't know me, not really. I know that you sing to your cattle when you milk them. I know that you saved the runt calf last spring, nursing it by hand when its mother rejected it. I know that you put out bread for the crows even when your own supplies run low. I know that you talk to your husband's grave every Sunday morning. His voice grew gentle. I know that you are lonely, as I am lonely. Tears slipped down Sarah's cheeks. She had thought she was invisible in her solitude, but this man had seen her more clearly than anyone had in years. What are you asking of me? She whispered. I am asking for a chance. Let me help you prepare for winter. Let me show you that you need not face the cold months alone. And perhaps, in time, you might find that you can trust me with more than just your winter survival. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The people in town, they would never understand. The people in town do not have to live your life, only you do. The truth of that statement settled over Sarah like a revelation. For 3 years, she had lived according to what others expected of a proper widow. She had worn black, kept to herself, turned away the few suitors who had approached her. She had built walls around her heart and called it respectability. But here sat a man who had seen past those walls, who understood her loneliness because he carried the same burden. A man who spoke of partnership and shared burdens, who valued her strength rather than trying to diminish it. I'm frightened, she admitted. As am I, Kaya replied. But perhaps we can be less frightened together. Outside, the wind had grown stronger, rattling the windows and sending autumn leaves skittering across the porch. The fire in the hearth crackled warmly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah looked at this man who had appeared out of the gathering darkness like an answer to prayers she hadn't dared to voice. If I said yes, she said slowly, if I agreed to let you help me through the winter, what would that mean? How would it work? Kaya considered this carefully. I would build a small shelter nearby, close enough to help but far enough to respect your privacy. I would help you prepare your cabin for the cold, gather enough wood to last the season, ensure your cattle are secure. In return, you might share your meals with me, your conversation, your company, and after winter, we see what has grown between us. If we find we suit each other, we make more permanent arrangements. If not, I continue on my path, and you continue on yours, but with knowledge that you can survive whatever comes. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. Every practical part of her mind catalogued the reasons this was impossible, the differences in their backgrounds, the gossip it would cause, the challenges they would face. But underneath all those concerns was a deeper truth she could no longer ignore. She was tired of being alone, tired of talking only to cattle and horses, tired of eating silent dinners, tired of facing every challenge without a partner by her side. And this man, this gentle giant who had watched over her without her knowledge, who spoke of her small kindnesses as if they mattered, who offered partnership rather than rescue. Perhaps he was not the future she had expected, but maybe he was the future she needed. There's a grove of aspens about a quarter-mile north of here, Sarah said, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. Near the creek, it would be a good place for a shelter. Akaya's face transformed with a smile that lit his entire countenance. Yes, he said, it would be perfect. As if in agreement, the wind outside began to calm, settling into a gentler rhythm. The fire popped and sparked, sending warmth throughout the small cabin. Sarah looked at Kaya across her simple wooden table and felt something shift in her chest, like ice breaking up on a river in spring. She was no longer alone. And perhaps, just perhaps, the best chapters of her life were still to be written. Tomorrow, she said, I'll show you where I keep the tools. We have a lot of work to do before the snow comes. Kaya nodded, his dark eyes warm with promise. Tomorrow, he agreed, and all the tomorrows that followed.